On my wedding day, I found the main table replaced. 9 seats were taken by my husband's family while my parents were left standing. His mom sneered, "They look poor." He agreed. So I made an announcement that ruined him instantly. My name is Abigail, and I am 33 years old. I am the Chief Executive Officer and founder of a highly successful cybersecurity and forensic accounting firm in Chicago. But to my husband Preston and his arrogant mother Beatrice, I was just a simple IT support worker who should be grateful to marry into their elite circle. They thought they could humiliate my retired public school teacher parents at my own wedding reception. They were terribly wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to put entitled toxic people in their place. The heavy oak doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom stood before me like the gateway to my happily ever after. I took a deep, long breath, letting the crisp, air-conditioned breeze settle my racing heart. I smoothed the delicate lace of my custom wedding gown, feeling a sense of overwhelming joy and accomplishment. The morning ceremony at the church had been beautiful, and now I was about to walk into my reception as a newlywed. The string quartet was playing a beautiful classical piece, and the soft murmur of 300 wealthy guests echoed from inside. Preston was mingling somewhere ahead of me, and I was ready to join him to celebrate our union. But the moment the event coordinator pulled the grand doors open, my smile vanished completely. I stepped into the ballroom, and the sheer extravagance of the space was undeniable. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the tables, which were draped in imported silk linens and topped with towering centerpieces of white hydrangeas and rare orchids. It was supposed to be a flawless evening. I scanned the massive room looking for the most important people in my life. I was looking for my parents, Richard and Patricia. They were retired public school teachers who had spent their entire lives giving to others. They were supposed to be seated at the main head table with me and Preston. The head table was designed to seat exactly 10 people. It was a beautiful long table positioned at the very front of the room, meant for the bride, the groom, and both sets of parents. But as my eyes landed on that table, I felt a cold, heavy knot form in the pit of my stomach. The seating arrangement had been completely altered behind my back while I was taking photos. There were 9 people already seated there, and none of them were my parents. Beatrice was sitting right in the center holding court like a queen, laughing loudly with a glass of champagne in her hand. Next to her was Preston's father, looking equally smug. The rest of the seats were filled by Preston's aunts, uncles, and an arrogant-looking business partner I barely knew. But the absolute final insult, the thing that made my blood boil uncontrollably, was the last seat. Sitting on a plush, velvet cushion, eating bits of premium smoked salmon off a delicate porcelain plate, was Beatrice's pampered white poodle. The dog was literally occupying the chair that was meant for the man who raised me. I frantically scanned the crowded ballroom, my heart pounding against my ribs. I finally spotted my parents standing awkwardly near a massive marble pillar far away from the main festivities. My father Richard was shifting uncomfortably in his rented black suit, trying to look brave, but failing to hide the hurt in his eyes. My mother Patricia was clutching her small, beaded purse, looking down at the polished floor. She was wearing a beautiful, modest dress she had sewn herself, because she wanted to save money for my future. Her hands were callous from years of hard work and dedication. They looked so incredibly out of place and isolated in this sea of superficial wealth. They were the people who had sacrificed everything for me, who had worked 14-hour days grading papers and tutoring neighborhood kids just so I could go to college without a single dollar of student debt. I remembered the nights my father would stay up late balancing the checkbook, ensuring we always had enough to get by. I remembered my mother spending hours carefully stitching the hem of that very dress, just so she could look her absolute best for my special day. And now they were being treated like unwanted strangers at their own daughter's wedding, forced to stand in a corner like second-class citizens while a dog ate salmon from a crystal plate. I did not walk toward my parents to offer comfort just yet. I marched straight toward the head table, my heavy lace train dragging behind me across the polished marble floor. The anger rising in my chest was blinding and consuming, a furious fire that threatened to burn down the entire room. I reached the long table and slammed my hands down on the crisp white linen, making the expensive crystal water goblets shake and the heavy silver cutlery rattle against the china. "Beatrice, what is the meaning of this?" I demanded, my voice low, but shaking with barely contained fury. "Where are my parents supposed to sit?" Beatrice did not even flinch at my sudden outburst. She slowly took a sip of her expensive vintage champagne, leaving a faint smudge of bright red lipstick on the rim of the delicate glass. She looked up at me with eyes that were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of empathy. She adjusted the heavy diamond necklace around her throat before letting out a small, condescending sigh, as if I were a petulant child interrupting an incredibly important adult conversation. "Keep your voice down," Abigail Beatrice said smoothly, her tone dripping with absolute venom. "This wedding has many very important VIP business partners attending. I had to invite them to sit at the main table to show them proper respect and secure future investments for our family. Your parents simply do not fit the high-class aesthetic we are going for tonight." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity and wickedness of her words. "They are my parents," I said, my voice trembling with disbelief and mounting rage. "This is my wedding." Beatrice gave me a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She let her gaze travel across the grand room, scanning the crowd, until she spotted my parents standing by the marble pillar. She sneered, her upper lip curling in revulsion, as if she were looking at something foul. "Look at them," Abigail Beatrice said, waving her perfectly manicured hand in their direction. "Your father is wearing a cheap suit that looks like it belongs in a thrift store clearance bin. Your mother is wearing something she clearly stitched together on a dusty dining room table. They look poor. They look incredibly tacky and entirely out of their element. The professional photographers from Society magazine are going to be taking pictures of the head table all night long to document this spectacular event. Having your parents sitting here looking like literal charity cases will completely ruin the reputation of our prestigious family." I told the event coordinator to set up 2 extra folding chairs at table 28. It is right next to the swinging doors of the catering kitchen where the staff takes out the trash. They will be much more comfortable back there with the waitstaff and the dishwashers. The sheer cruelty of her statement hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind entirely out of my lungs. She was talking about the 2 most selfless, loving, and intelligent people I knew. She was talking about my father, who had taught math to underprivileged kids for 30 years and changed countless lives with his endless patience. She was talking about my mother, who volunteered at the community center every single weekend to feed the homeless and comfort the broken. Beatrice considered them trash simply because they did not wear expensive designer labels or drip in fake jewels purchased on credit. I wanted to scream at her right then and there. I wanted to tell her that I knew her entire wealthy persona was a complete and utter fabrication built on lies and massive debt. But I held my tongue, turning around frantically to find my husband. Surely Preston, the man who promised to love and protect me, would not allow his mother to treat my family this way on the most important day of our lives. I spotted Preston walking toward the head table from the crowded bar area. He looked incredibly handsome in his $5,000 Tom Ford tuxedo, holding a glass of aged bourbon and laughing loudly with one of his groomsmen. He looked like the picture-perfect groom, completely oblivious to the nightmare unfolding at the front of the room. I rushed over to him, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the crowd into a quiet, dimly lit hallway just outside the main ballroom doors. "Preston, we have a very serious problem," I said, my voice cracking with emotion and desperate hope. "Your mother kicked my parents out of the head table. She put a literal dog in one of the seats and told my parents to go sit by the kitchen doors on folding chairs. You need to talk to her right now and fix this before my parents leave in tears." I looked up into his eyes, fully expecting to see anger on my behalf. I expected him to be horrified by his mother's disgraceful behavior and rush to defend the humble people who raised the woman he loved. Instead, Preston looked immensely annoyed and entirely unsympathetic. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and glanced around nervously to see if anyone from his firm was watching us argue. Jesus, Abigail. Do you really have to make a huge scene right now? Preston whispered harshly, pulling me further into the shadowed hallway where no one could hear us. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and you are acting completely hysterical over a simple seating arrangement. Hysterical. I repeated the word, tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. Preston. My parents are standing alone by a pillar in a room full of strangers. Your mother said they look too poor to sit with us. Preston tightened his grip on my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. His handsome face twisted into a scowl of intense irritation and condescension. Look, Abigail, you have to see this from her perspective. My mother has a very specific high society image to uphold in Chicago. I manage a highly prestigious investment fund. My top clients are in that room right now. My billionaire investors are drinking our champagne. When they look at the head table, they need to see power, wealth, and absolute success. They do not need to see a couple of retired public school teachers looking completely lost. He paused, looking me up and down as if I were a complete stranger who had wandered in off the street asking for a handout. Your father is wearing a suit that looks like he bought it at Goodwill 5 years ago. Your mother looks like a peasant in that handmade curtain she is wearing. I am sorry to be harsh, but it is the honest truth, and someone needs to say it. You are my wife now. You need to start understanding how the real world works and what is expected of you in this social bracket. Just go tell them to sit at table 28 and enjoy the free, expensive food we provided for them. Stop trying to embarrass me in front of my business partners over something so incredibly trivial. The air in the hallway seemed to instantly vanish, leaving me gasping for a breath I could not catch. I stood there, staring wide-eyed at the man I had just married a few hours ago. I had loved Preston with my whole heart. I had believed he was a driven, ambitious man who deeply cared about me and respected my modest roots. But in that single defining moment, the romantic illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He was not a good man. He was a shallow, greedy narcissist who cared more about the fleeting opinions of wealthy strangers than the dignity and feelings of the people who gave me life. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my entire body. The tears that had been threatening to fall completely dried up. My sadness evaporated instantly, replaced by an intense, calculated, and unyielding rage. Preston and Beatrice thought they could treat me like a naive, helpless IT worker. They thought I was a poor girl who should bow down and be eternally grateful they allowed me into their elite social circle. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. They had no idea that I was the one secretly funding this entire extravagant lifestyle they loved to constantly boast about. I looked at Preston, analyzing his face, not with love, but with the cold precision of a forensic auditor. I noticed the arrogant, dismissive smirk playing on his lips. He really thought I was going to lower my head and obey his command like a well-trained dog. He thought I would walk over to my wonderful parents, break their hearts, and tell them they were not good enough to sit at my wedding. He was dead wrong. Okay, Preston, I said, my voice dangerously calm and incredibly steady. I understand perfectly. I will go handle it right now. Preston smiled, patting my cheek condescendingly as if rewarding a child. That is my good girl. Now wipe your face and come back inside. We have to cut the cake soon, and I need you looking perfect for the photos. He turned and walked casually back into the ballroom, leaving me alone in the silent hallway. I did not cry. I did not panic. I stood there and took a deep, steadying breath. They wanted to play a ruthless game of status and wealth. They wanted to publicly humiliate the people I loved most in the entire world. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had handed the microphone to the one person who had the immense power and the digital proof to destroy their entire fraudulent empire. I adjusted my heavy wedding dress, lifted my chin high, and prepared to walk back into that ballroom, not as a heartbroken bride, but as the architect of their absolute and complete ruin. I reached out and grabbed his arm before he could push the heavy ballroom doors open. My fingers dug fiercely into the expensive fabric of his sleeve, and I yanked him back into the shadows of the hallway. He stumbled slightly, his amber bourbon sloshing over the rim of his crystal glass and staining the patterned carpet. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, trying to aggressively shake off my grip. "Let go of me, Abigail." "Do not walk away from me, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We are not done talking. You want to talk about my father's suit? Let us talk about it right now." He rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "I do not have time for this emotional breakdown. My investors are waiting inside." "That suit you just called garbage was purchased with the life savings of a man who worked 14 hours a day for 30 solid years." I continued, refusing to let him interrupt. "My father taught high school math by day and tutored struggling teenagers until midnight. During the summers when your family was supposedly lounging on private yachts, he was painting houses in the blistering heat. He wore shoes with holes in the soles so that I could attend a top-tier university. He sacrificed every single luxury in his life so I could graduate without a single dollar of student loan debt hanging over my head. My parents gave me the ultimate freedom, while your parents only gave you an obsession with looking rich." Preston scoffed, adjusting his cuffs with an air of complete arrogance. "Oh, please, Abigail, spare me the working-class hero speech. It is embarrassing. No one in that room cares about how hard your dad worked. They only care about how he presents himself in a room full of millionaires. Perception is reality in my world. If you look poor, people treat you like you are poor. Your mother had the audacity to hand them folding chairs while her dog sits on a velvet cushion," I said, my anger rising. "And you stood there and agreed with her. You watched the man who bought my first computer, the man who stayed up late helping me build my future, be treated like absolute garbage." "He is a public school teacher," Abigail Preston shot back, his tone dripping with disdain. "He has zero business connections. My mother is trying to secure a $10 million investment from the guy sitting next to her poodle. That is how the real world operates. It is brutal and it is transactional. You need to grow up and realize that love does not pay the bills. Status pays the bills. Perception is a lie." Preston, I fired back, taking a step closer until he was forced to back up against the wall. "Because if perception were reality, you would actually be able to afford the clothes on your back. That $5,000 Tom Ford tuxedo you are wearing right now, the one you are strutting around in like a Wall Street genius, you did not pay for that, I did." His face flushed an ugly shade of red. He quickly glanced around the empty hallway, terrified that someone from his firm might overhear us. "Keep your voice down," he demanded, his tone shifting from arrogant to panicked. "Remember last week at the boutique?" I pressed on, my words sharp and unrelenting. "Your platinum credit card was declined at the register. You panicked. You pulled me aside, sweating profusely and begging me to put it on my card. You told me it was just a temporary hold on your accounts due to a massive international wire transfer. You swore you would pay me back the next morning. I am still waiting for that transfer, Preston. I paid for the suit you are wearing to insult my father." "It was a banking error," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "You do not understand how investment capital works. My money is tied up in high-yield assets. Liquidity is always tight before a major quarterly payout. I told you I will reimburse your little IT salary 100 times over when my fund matures next month. You are being completely irrational and incredibly cheap over a few basic wedding expenses." "Basic wedding expenses?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Preston, I have spent over $40,000 just covering the gaps your wealthy mother supposedly forgot to pay. When her check to the caterer bounced 2 days ago, I paid the balance. When the florist threatened to cancel the delivery because your family ignored their invoices, I used my corporate card to save the day. I never complained because I loved you. I thought we were building a partnership. But you just proved that you view me and my family as nothing more than a convenient automated teller machine and a social embarrassment. Is that what you call status? Racking up secret debt to pretend you are rich? I am building an empire," he hissed. "You just lack the vision to see it. You should be grateful, Abigail. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position right now? You get to be my wife. You get to attend exclusive galas and live in the upper echelon of Chicago society. All you have to do is play the part, smile for the cameras, and keep your mouth shut. But instead, you are out here throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child. I am giving you a life you could never achieve on your own." I stared at the man I had married. The grand illusion was entirely broken. He genuinely believed his own lies. He really thought I was just some desperate girl clinging to his coattails, hoping for a taste of high society. He had absolutely no idea who I really was. He did not know that my technology company had just secured a massive federal contract. He did not know my net worth surpassed his entire investment firm's fake valuation. "You are not giving me anything, Preston," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You are just a parasite wearing a suit I bought." He glared at me, his jaw clenching with fury. "If you do not go into that ballroom right now and fix your attitude, we are going to have a very serious problem. My mother is right. You and your family just do not belong here. Go tell them to sit in the back. Do it now, Abigail." He turned his back on me and stormed toward the ballroom doors, adjusting his perfectly styled hair before pushing his way back into the party. He left me standing alone in the quiet corridor, fully expecting me to obey his command and break my parents' hearts. He thought his intimidation tactics had worked. He thought he had won the argument. I stood there taking a deep breath, the anger in my chest hardened into absolute resolve. I looked down at my hands and realized they were completely steady. I was not going to cry. I was not going to hide. I was going to tear his fake life down to the foundations. Preston stopped with his hand resting on the heavy brass handle of the ballroom doors. He did not push them open. Instead, he let out a low, humorless laugh that echoed down the quiet corridor. He turned back to face me, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated pity mixed with absolute contempt. He looked at me, not as a bride or a partner, but as an employee who had just asked for an unreasonable raise. "You are seriously standing here calculating pennies on our wedding day," he said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "You are actually keeping a ledger of every little thing you bought. That is exactly the kind of small-minded, petty behavior I have been trying to train out of you, Abigail. It is exhausting." He let go of the door handle and slowly walked back toward me. His polished leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. The expensive fabric of the tuxedo jacket pulled taut across his shoulders. "Listen to yourself," he continued, his voice dropping into that smooth, persuasive tone he used when closing a deal with a hesitant client. "You fix computers for a living. You sit in a cramped, windowless cubicle, staring at lines of code and telling people to restart their laptops. Your entire professional existence revolves around pushing buttons and hiding behind a desk. What could you possibly understand about the nuances of high society networking? What do you know about the unwritten rules of elite social circles?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off, holding up a hand to silence me. "Nothing, Abigail. You know absolutely nothing. In my world, relationships are currency. A single dinner conversation can secure a $10 million fund. A proper seating arrangement can make or break a crucial merger. My mother understands this perfectly. She was born into this world, and she knows how to navigate it flawlessly. You, on the other hand, are completely out of your depth. You are drowning in a sea of social expectations you cannot even begin to comprehend." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp smell of bourbon made my stomach churn. "You want to talk about money?" He challenged, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You want to throw your little $40,000 contribution in my face, like it makes you the savior of this wedding. Do you have any idea how much this entire event actually costs? My family dropped $150,000 to give you the fairy tale wedding you could never afford on your own. My mother liquidated assets and pulled favors from exclusive vendors just to ensure you had a day worthy of the Preston name. She paid for the venue. She paid for the imported caviar. She paid for the premium open bar that your relatives are currently enjoying." He pointed a finger at me, tapping it in the air to emphasize his words. "My family covered the real expenses. We provided the foundation for this entire event. Your little credit card swipes were just covering rounding errors." And instead of being grateful, instead of getting down on your knees and thanking my mother for allowing you to experience a lifestyle you could only dream of, you have the nerve to stand here and demand she give up her seat at the head table. You want to displace the very people who funded this extravagant night just so your parents can feel important. The sheer audacity of his lies was staggering. He spoke with such absolute conviction that a weaker person might have actually started to doubt their own sanity. He was a master of manipulation, spinning a web of deceit so thick and suffocating that it was meant to leave me paralyzed with guilt. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel like an ungrateful charity case who had overstepped her bounds. "You need to learn your place, Abigail," he said, his voice hardening into a sharp command. "You are a very lucky woman. You managed to marry a man who can elevate you out of your mediocre existence, but you have to stop fighting the process. You have to stop acting like a stubborn peasant and start behaving like a proper wife. That means you defer to my mother. That means you respect the hierarchy of this family. And that means you stop embarrassing me with your desperate need to validate your parents." He reached out and roughly adjusted the delicate lace collar of my wedding dress. A gesture disguised as affection but delivered with aggressive possessiveness. "When we walk back into that room, you are going to smile," he instructed, his eyes cold and dead. "You are going to walk straight up to my mother, and you are going to thank her for everything she has done for you today. You are going to take your seat at the head table next to me, and you are going to mingle with my investors. And you are going to leave your parents exactly where they are, because that is where they belong. Do you understand me?" He leaned in close, his breath warm against my cheek. "Be a good wife, Abigail. Do not ruin the $150,000 gift my family graciously bestowed upon you. Know your place and learn to be grateful." He stared down at me, waiting for my submission. He expected my eyes to fill with tears of shame. He expected me to lower my head, apologize for my supposed ignorance, and meekly agree to his demands. He was so accustomed to steamrolling over people with his fake wealth and manufactured authority that he could not even fathom the possibility of resistance. I looked at his perfectly groomed face and the tailored suit I had paid for. The hypocrisy of his words echoed in the quiet hallway. He genuinely believed that his job of moving other people's money around made him a god among men, while my career in technology was something to be mocked and discarded. He thought I was just a mindless drone typing away in a basement. He had never once asked me about the specifics of my job. He had never shown a single ounce of interest in the projects I managed or the clients I protected. To him, I was just a convenient prop, a quiet, unassuming woman who would look nice in photos and never challenge his supreme authority. His blatant lie about the $150,000 was the most pathetic part of his entire speech. He was using his mother's fabricated generosity as a weapon to beat me into submission. He was trying to gaslight me into feeling indebted to a woman who had never spent a single dime on me. The psychological abuse was so transparent, so clumsily executed, that it almost made me laugh. He was a cornered animal lashing out with grand illusions of wealth to hide his own crippling financial inadequacy. I kept my expression entirely neutral, offering him absolutely nothing. I did not nod. I did not blink. I just stared into his empty blue eyes, memorizing every detail of this profound betrayal. I let the silence stretch between us, forcing him to sit in the uncomfortable void of my lack of response. I wanted him to feel the shift in the atmosphere, even if his arrogant mind could not quite comprehend what was happening. "Well," he snapped, finally breaking the silence, his impatience getting the better of him. "Are we clear, Abigail? Are you done throwing this ridiculous tantrum so we can get back to our wedding?" I took a slow, calculated breath, preparing to respond, but before I could utter a single syllable, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open. The loud, upbeat rhythm of a jazz band spilled out into the hallway, along with the raucous laughter of men who had consumed far too much expensive liquor. The private confrontation was suddenly interrupted, setting the stage for the next wave of insults. Two figures stepped out of the vibrant ballroom, laughing loudly. It was Trent and Harrison, Preston's closest friends and top managing partners at his investment firm. They carried crystal glasses filled with neat whiskey and held unlit imported cigars between their fingers, looking every bit the quintessential arrogant finance bros they pretended to be. Preston instantly dropped his threatening posture. The cruel sneer on his face transformed into a relaxed, charismatic smile. He clapped Harrison on the shoulder, acting as if he had not just been verbally abusing me seconds prior. "Everything good out here?" Trent asked, taking a slow sip of his drink. He looked me up and down with an unmistakable gaze of evaluation, as if calculating my exact market value. "You two have been out in the hallway for a while." Beatrice was wondering if the bride decided to make a run for it. Preston chuckled, shaking his head. "Just dealing with some minor wedding day jitters. Abigail is feeling a little overwhelmed by the crowd." "Oh, I get it," Harrison chimed in, leaning casually against the silk wallpaper. "It is a lot to take in when you are not used to this caliber of society. I saw your folks standing over by the service doors earlier, Abby. To be completely honest, I almost handed your dad my empty glass because I thought he was part of the catering staff. That suit he is wearing looks like it survived the Great Depression." Trent barked out a loud laugh, finding the insult incredibly amusing. "I was going to say the same thing, and your mother looks like she is terrified someone is going to charge her an entry fee just for breathing the air in here. But hey, do not take it personally. It is just a massive culture shock for them. They are simple people. They do not understand how events of this magnitude operate." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting smoothly against the folds of my dress. The urge to scream had completely evaporated. I was now operating with the cold, calculating precision of a predator studying its prey. I looked at Trent and Harrison, taking in their smug expressions and their false sense of superiority. These were the men Preston surrounded himself with. These were the men who helped him siphon money from unsuspecting investors. They were cut from the exact same cloth, shallow, greedy, and utterly convinced of their own untouchable status. "You need to relax and look at the bigger picture, Abby." Trent continued, taking a step closer and lowering his voice into a tone of patronizing advice. "You hit the absolute jackpot today. Do you have any idea how many women in Chicago spend their entire lives trying to lock down a guy like Preston? He manages millions of dollars. His family has connections to the mayor, to the board of trade, to people who actually run this city. You are a tech support girl who got plucked out of a cubicle and handed a golden ticket. You are living the ultimate Cinderella story." Harrison nodded in agreement, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Trent is right. You need to be smart about this. Beatrice is a force of nature. She built the social standing of this family from the ground up. If she wants her poodle sitting at the head table, you do not argue with her. You smile, you fetch the dog a silk napkin, and you thank her for the privilege of being in the same room." Trent leaned in, his breath reeking of expensive alcohol and unearned arrogance. "Let me give you some free advice since you are new to the major leagues. Do not fumble this bag over something as stupid as pride. You do not want to make an enemy out of Beatrice, and you definitely do not want to embarrass Preston in front of his clients. Guys in our tax bracket have options, Abby. Endless options. If you become a liability or a headache, Preston could replace you with a younger, more compliant model before the ink on your marriage certificate even dries. Do not bite the hand that feeds you. Just swallow your working-class pride, obey your mother-in-law, and enjoy the ride. Otherwise, you will find yourself kicked to the curb and back to fixing routers for minimum wage." Preston watched this entire exchange with a look of supreme satisfaction. He did not defend me. He did not tell his friends to back off or show respect to his new wife. He simply stood there, letting them do his dirty work, letting them reinforce the toxic hierarchy he expected me to accept. He felt completely validated by their cruel words. I looked at the three of them standing together like a pack of wolves who thought they had successfully cornered a helpless lamb. They were so incredibly confident. They thought their expensive suits and their finance jargon made them invincible. They thought my silence was submission. They did not know that my silence was actually the sound of a trap snapping shut. I knew exactly who Trent and Harrison were. I knew their financial portfolios just as intimately as I knew Preston's. As the director of cybersecurity for the firm auditing their assets, I had seen the digital blood trail they left behind. I knew that Trent was facing multiple margin calls he could not cover. I knew that Harrison had secretly mortgaged his grandmother's estate to keep up appearances. They were standing here mocking my parents' modest clothes while they were secretly drowning in millions of dollars of fraudulent debt. They were fake millionaires lecturing a real millionaire on how to behave in high society. The irony was so delicious it almost tasted sweet. I understand, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just offered them a serene, empty smile. You are absolutely right. I need to look at the bigger picture. I should definitely show your family and your investors exactly what kind of value I bring to this partnership. Preston smirked, looking immensely relieved. He clapped his hands together, clapping Harrison on the back. Exactly. That is the spirit. Now let us get back in there. We have a cake to cut, and I need to introduce you to the regional director of Chase Bank. Try not to say anything embarrassing. Preston turned and pushed the heavy ballroom doors open, leading his groomsmen back into the vibrant sea of music and laughter. Trent and Harrison followed him, shooting me one last warning look before disappearing into the crowd. They walked back to their doom completely unaware that I was right behind them. I was not going to the kitchen doors to comfort my parents. I was not going to take my seat and smile for the cameras. I was going to the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. I was going to burn their fake empire straight to the ground. I stood perfectly still in the empty corridor, watching the heavy brass doors swing shut behind them. The muffled sounds of the jazz band and the clinking of crystal glasses bled through the wood, but inside my mind everything was completely silent. It was the kind of silence that precedes a devastating hurricane. I did not shed a single tear. I did not tremble. The naive girl who walked down the aisle a few hours ago, eager to please her new family, was entirely gone. In her place stood the chief executive officer of a premier cybersecurity firm, a woman who made a living dismantling complex digital frauds and exposing corporate criminals. And the greatest fraud of all was currently drinking vintage champagne at my wedding reception. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, had spent the last 6 months orchestrating a masterful public relations campaign across the elite social circles of Chicago. I had stood quietly by her side at charity galas and country club luncheons, listening to her boast to other wealthy socialites. She would casually fan herself and loudly proclaim how much money her family was pouring into this wedding. $150,000, she would sigh, feigning exhaustion. It is a staggering amount, but we simply had to give Preston's new bride the fairy tale she could never afford on her own. She painted herself as the ultimate benevolent matriarch, lifting a penniless IT worker out of obscurity and gifting her a royal celebration. The entire high society crowd praised her generosity and whispered behind my back about how incredibly lucky I was to be saved by such a prominent family. What those wealthy socialites did not know, what Trent and Harrison and even Preston did not fully comprehend, was the actual source of that funding. The reality was a closely guarded secret that I had kept out of pure love and misguided loyalty to my husband. Beatrice had not contributed a single dime to this wedding. Every time a vendor demanded a deposit, Beatrice would suddenly claim her wealth was tied up in illiquid offshore accounts or that her wealth manager was on vacation. She would feign a panic attack, and Preston would pull me aside, begging me to cover the cost temporarily just to save his mother from embarrassment. He swore they would reimburse me before the wedding day. I loved him, so I quietly agreed. I pulled out my sleek metal corporate black card. The name of my cybersecurity limited liability company was etched deeply into the titanium. This tiny piece of metal had financed their entire grand illusion. The $50,000 deposit for the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was paid by me. The $20,000 for the imported white orchids and hydrangeas was paid by me. The exclusive catering, the truffles, the premium open bar where those arrogant groomsmen were currently getting drunk, it was all completely funded by my hard-earned money. Even the custom velvet cushion that Beatrice Poodle was currently sitting on had been charged to my account just 3 days ago when her credit card was declined at the pet boutique. The sheer audacity of their delusion was staggering. They were parading around the ballroom acting like royalty, looking down their noses at my parents while eating food I had purchased. They dared to mock my father for wearing a modest suit when they were entirely bankrolled by my success. My parents had genuine wealth of character. They had integrity, honesty, and a lifetime of selfless service. They sat by those kitchen doors with more grace and dignity than Beatrice could ever hope to possess. My mind processed the data with cold mechanical precision. Preston and his mother were not elite socialites. They were financial parasites. They had constructed a magnificent house of cards built entirely on my silent financial backing. They needed me to be the quiet, naive girl because if I ever spoke up, their entire facade would shatter. They relied on my working-class humility, assuming I would be too intimidated by their fake status to ever challenge them in public. They thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They did not realize it was the silence of someone gathering evidence. The rage inside me compressed into something sharp and lethal. I was no longer a victim trapped in a toxic family dynamic. I was a predator who had just locked the doors to the cage. They wanted to play a game of status and perception. They wanted to worship money and use it as a weapon to humiliate the people I loved most. I decided right then and there to give them exactly what they worshipped. I would give them the ultimate lesson in high-stakes finance. I smoothed the front of my wedding gown, feeling the heavy silk against my skin. I did not need to run into the bathroom and fix my makeup. I did not need to hide in a corner and wait for permission to exist. I knew the exact layout of the ballroom. I knew that the audio-visual control booth was located on the second-floor balcony, directly overlooking the main dance floor. My assistant who managed my corporate events was already stationed up there managing the slideshow we had planned for later in the evening. I had a secure encrypted folder on my phone containing every single invoice, every bounced check from Beatrice, and every desperate text message Preston had sent me begging for money. I walked down the corridor, my steps measured and purposeful. I was not heading back to the kitchen to cry with my parents. I was not going to the head table to bow my head and serve a dog. I was walking straight to the control booth. I was going to project every single financial truth onto the massive screen surrounding the ballroom. I was going to let Chicago high society see exactly who was paying for their champagne. The storm had finally broken, and I was bringing it directly to their table. I altered my path toward the stairs and followed the sudden movement near the service corridors. Through the glass panels of the private bridal suite, I saw Preston and his mother aggressively steering my parents inside. My father looked deeply confused. My mother held his arm tightly. I slipped into the narrow alcove just outside the suite, leaving the heavy wooden door cracked open by a single inch. I needed to hear this. I needed to witness the absolute bottom of their depravity before I burned their world to ash. Preston stood by the door with his arms crossed, acting like a bouncer at a nightclub. Beatrice paced in front of the plush velvet sofa where my parents had been forced to sit. She reached into her imported leather handbag and pulled out a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. With a dramatic and deeply insulting flourish, she tossed the cash onto the polished mahogany coffee table right in front of my father. The heavy thud of the money echoed in the quiet room. "Take it," Beatrice commanded, her voice completely devoid of any basic human decency. "There is $1,000 right there. That is more than enough to cover a premium luxury cab ride back to whatever modest little suburb you came from, and a very nice dinner at a chain restaurant of your choosing." My father stared at the money and then looked up at Beatrice. His face was a portrait of dignified shock. "I do not understand," Richard said, his voice steady but laced with confusion. "We do not need your money, Beatrice. We are waiting for the dinner service to begin so we can toast to our daughter." Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She looked at Preston, rolling her eyes as if dealing with a slow child. "You are not staying for the dinner service, Richard. You are leaving right now. And you are going to use the service elevator at the back of the kitchen so none of my high-profile guests see you exiting the building." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Patricia looked at Preston, her eyes begging for an explanation. "Preston, please," my mother said, her voice trembling. Did we do something wrong? We just want to watch Abigail cut her wedding cake. Preston did not even have the courtesy to look ashamed. He shifted his weight, checking his expensive watch. Look, Patricia, let us just be honest and practical here. The ceremony was beautiful. You got to see Abigail walk down the aisle. You got your photos at the church. You were present for the actual marriage, and that is quite enough. The reception is an entirely different environment. We are transitioning into a highly exclusive networking event. There will be formal ballroom dancing, a premium vintage wine tasting, and high-level investment discussions. Beatrice stepped forward, leaning over the table to glare directly at my mother. I absolutely refuse to have you making a mockery of my prestigious family, she hissed. I saw how you looked at the appetizer trays earlier. You looked completely lost. Later tonight, we are serving a 7-course tasting menu. I will not have my billionaire investors watching you fumble with your silverware or embarrassing us because you do not know the difference between a Bordeaux glass and a water goblet. You do not belong in that room. You are a visual liability to our brand. The sheer venom in her words was physically sickening. She was talking to the woman who had spent countless hours volunteering at local shelters, the woman who taught me everything about grace and kindness. Beatrice possessed millions in fake assets, but she was completely bankrupt of any moral character. My father slowly stood up. He did not touch the money. He straightened his inexpensive jacket, pulling himself up to his full height. He looked Preston directly in the eye. I gave you my daughter's hand today, Richard said, his voice dropping to a low protective timbre. I trusted you to cherish her. And you stand there letting your mother treat her family like garbage. Preston scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Do not try to guilt-trip me, Richard. I am doing you a massive favor. You both look miserable out there anyway. You are clearly out of your depth. We are giving you a graceful exit and $1,000 for your trouble. Most people would say thank you. Just take the cash and go quietly. Do not ruin Abigail's perfect day by causing a scene. Beatrice snapped her fingers, pointing toward the kitchen doors. The catering staff has been instructed to show you the way out. Do not try to go back into the main hall. Do not try to say goodbye to Abigail. She is currently mingling with the regional director of Chase Bank, and she cannot be distracted by emotional outbursts from her parents. She knows exactly what is expected of her tonight. Just disappear and let her enjoy the life we are giving her. My mother stood up, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and silently running down her cheeks. She grabbed my father's arm, pulling him gently toward the service door. Richard, let us just go, Patricia whispered, her voice breaking with absolute devastation. We do not want to ruin Abigail's big night. If this is what Preston and his family need for their business, we should not stand in the way. She is married now. We have to let her fit into her new world. Let us just go home. They were willing to swallow the most horrific insult imaginable just to ensure I was happy. They were willing to walk out the back door next to the garbage bins, crying and humiliated because they believed it would protect my future. They loved me so purely and completely that they would accept being treated like untouchables. My father looked at the $1,000 on the table with absolute disgust. He turned his back on the cash, wrapping his arm protectively around my mother. We do not want your money, Beatrice, he said quietly. We only came to celebrate our child. As they turned toward the swinging kitchen doors, Preston let out a loud breath of relief. Thank God, he muttered to his mother. That could have been a massive disaster. Now we can actually enjoy the evening without hiding them in the shadows. I stood in the alcove, my fingernails digging so hard into my palms that the skin nearly broke. I watched the two most important people in my life walk away in tears, carrying the heavy burden of shame that belonged entirely to the monsters in that room. The final shred of mercy I had left in my soul instantly evaporated. The trap had been set, and the final insult had been delivered. I turned away from the door and walked straight toward the audiovisual booth. The time for hiding was over. The time for absolute destruction had arrived. My father Richard did not reach for the money on the table. He did not even look at the stack of $100 bills again. Instead, he turned toward my mother and gently took her hand. His fingers, which were still stained with the faint scent of the chalk he had used to teach thousands of students over 3 decades, were steady and protective. My mother, Patricia, was trembling so violently that the sequins on her handmade dress clicked together like small teeth. She reached for her modest faux leather handbag, the one she had bought on sale specifically for this wedding, and clutched it to her chest as if it were a shield. "I am so sorry, Richard," my mother whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. "I just wanted to see her cut the cake. I just wanted to see her happy." "We are going home, Patricia," my father said, his voice low and heavy with a dignity that Beatrice could never hope to understand. "We have seen what we needed to see. Our daughter is married. Our job here is done." I watched from the shadows of the alcove as they began to walk toward the heavy swinging doors of the catering kitchen. The sight of their backs hit me like a physical blade through my heart. My father was slightly hunched, his shoulders, which had carried the weight of our family's future for so long, now looked smaller in that rented tuxedo. The fabric was stiff and cheap, and I noticed for the first time that the hem of his trousers was slightly frayed. He had chosen to rent the cheapest option so he could give me a larger wedding gift. My mother walked beside him, her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the floor to avoid the gaze of any hotel staff who might see her shame. Her dress, which she had spent months sewing by hand in the late hours of the night, looked beautiful in the soft light, but it was a symbol of a lifetime of making do with less so that I could have more. Beatrice stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, a look of supreme triumph on her face. She watched them leave as if she were watching trash being removed from her pristine living room. She did not say a word, but the smug set of her jaw spoke volumes. She had won. She had successfully purged the elite air of her party from the stench of the working class. Preston was already moving toward the ornate mirror on the wall. He adjusted his silk bow tie and smoothed the lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo, the one that was currently being financed by my corporate credit card. He looked at his reflection with a satisfied smirk, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just sent his wife's parents out the back door in tears. Finally, he muttered, checking his watch again. "I thought they would never leave. Now we can get back to the ballroom before the main course is served. My mother needs to introduce me to the chairman of that private equity firm. This night is finally moving in the right direction." Beatrice nodded her head in agreement, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Honestly, Preston, I do not know how you survived being around that level of mediocrity for so long. They are nice enough people in their own little world, I suppose, but they simply lack the refinement required for a family of our stature. I hope Abigail realizes what a massive upgrade she has received today. She should be thanking me for the rest of her life for giving her a seat at our table. The visual of my parents disappearing through those swinging doors will be burned into my retinas forever. They were heading toward the service elevator past the industrial dishwashers and the stacks of dirty crates because they believed their presence would hurt my social standing. They were willing to be humiliated, to be treated like second-class citizens, and to leave their only daughter's wedding without a proper goodbye just because they loved me. They were protecting my future while the man I had just married was actively dismantling my soul. I felt a surge of heat starting from the soles of my feet and rushing upward until my entire body was vibrating with a cold, lethal rage. My blood was not just boiling, it was turning into a storm of ice and steel. Every sacrifice my parents had ever made flashed before my eyes. The missed vacations, the worn-out cars, the extra tutoring jobs, the way they never once complained about the lack of luxury because they were too busy building a foundation of love and integrity for me. They had given me everything, and in return I had brought them into a nest of vipers. I realized then that my silence was no longer a virtue. My humility was no longer an asset. By staying quiet and pretending to be the naive IT girl, I was allowing these monsters to believe they were superior. I was allowing them to trample over the two people who represented everything good and honest in this world. I took one last look at my parents as the kitchen door began to swing shut. My mother's shoulders were shaking with a fresh sob, and my father's arm tightened around her. They looked so vulnerable and so incredibly alone. Preston turned away from the mirror and looked at Beatrice. "Ready?" he asked. "Wait," Beatrice said, leaning in to adjust his collar. "You have a bit of lint here. We have to look perfect. The photographers are waiting." They both laughed, a shallow, hollow sound that echoed off the marble walls of the suite. They were so busy worshipping their fake image that they did not notice the temperature in the room had dropped 40 degrees. They did not notice the heavy silk of my wedding gown rustling as I stepped out from the alcove. I did not call out to my parents. I did not stop them. If I brought them back now, they would only be subjected to more insults. No, I was going to let them leave, but I was going to make sure that by the time they reached their car, the world they had just been kicked out of would no longer exist for Preston and Beatrice. I did not walk back into the ballroom to take my seat. I did not look at Preston or his mother as I passed the suite. I kept my eyes fixed forward. I was heading for the second floor. I was heading for the brains of this entire operation. The audiovisual control booth was my destination. It was the place where the narrative of this night was controlled. Preston thought he was the director of this play, but he had forgotten one very important detail. I was the one who owned the theater. I was the one who had built the security protocols he relied on. I was the one with the administrative access to every single dark secret he had tried to bury in his digital trail. As I climbed the stairs, my mind was already several steps ahead. I was calculating the impact of the data I was about to release. I was visualizing the look on Beatrice's face when her prestigious friends realized she was a bankrupt fraud. I was imagining the sound of the handcuffs clicking around Preston's wrists. They wanted a wedding they would never forget. They wanted a night that would be talked about in Chicago high society for years to come. Fine. I was going to give them exactly that. I was going to give them a finale that would shatter their glass house into a million jagged shards. The time for endurance was over. The time for the CEO to take control of the microphone had officially begun. In the quiet hallway, Preston stopped me just as I stepped out of the waiting room. He slipped a hand into his tuxedo pocket, pulled out a thin leather folder, and placed it on the wooden table beside him. Beatrice approached as well, arms crossed, her expression cold and calculating, as if she were witnessing a business transaction instead of a wedding. "Abigail, we need to handle one final detail before the main reception," Preston said, his voice stripped of the fake warmth he'd worn during the church ceremony. He opened the folder, revealing a thick legal contract. "It's a post-nuptial agreement, just a simple procedure to protect our future." I stared at the bold title at the top of the page, "A post-nuptial agreement." "You want me to sign this right now in the middle of our wedding?" Beatrice smirked, the kind of smile a predator gives before the kill. "Think of it as a gesture of goodwill, Abigail. A woman entering a family of our stature should be eager to prove she isn't here for the wrong reasons. We have a legacy to protect." Preston picked up a heavy silver fountain pen and held it out to me. "Be realistic, Abigail. Your little IT company isn't worth much. It's basically a hobby for people who like typing lines of code in a basement. It has no real market value, and honestly, it'll probably become obsolete soon. I don't care about those little computer support services." He leaned closer over the table, greed flashing in his eyes and twisting his handsome face into something ugly. "But your penthouse," he continued. "That's different. Gold Coast location, prime Chicago real estate. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, lake view. My company had it appraised last week. It's worth at least $3.5 million, and it's solely in your name." "So that's what you want," I said calmly. "My home." "I want security for us," Preston corrected. "That penthouse is a dead asset right now. If you transfer it into the Preston Family Trust, we can leverage it for a new investment fund I'm building. It stays in the family, Abigail. This is simply your chance to prove you're truly part of this family." He stepped closer, invading my space. The expensive cologne he wore suddenly felt suffocating. "My mother's been hearing whispers," he said softly. "People in our circle are talking. They see a woman like you marrying a man like me, and they immediately assume gold digger. They think you came here to drain the Preston accounts and live off our name. Signing this proves them wrong. It proves you love me for who I am, not for my status. And if I refuse," I asked. Beatrice turned toward me, her eyes icy. Then I suppose we've made a very expensive mistake today. Preston has a reputation to maintain. We cannot have a daughter-in-law who keeps private escape routes for herself. If you want the luxury of carrying the Preston name, you must surrender the independence of an ordinary person. It's a very fair exchange. Preston tapped the signature line with the pen. Look what happened tonight with your parents, Abigail, he said. Embarrassing, sloppy, they don't belong here. My mother was generous enough to hand them $1,000 just to save you from the humiliation of watching them struggle through a high society reception. I'm trying to elevate you. I'm trying to make sure you never have to look like them again. But I need to know you're fully committed to this lifestyle. Then he leaned close to my ear so Beatrice couldn't hear. I know you're upset about the seating issue. Sign this, and next month we'll take your parents somewhere nice for lunch, maybe even buy your father a better suit. But I need you to do this now. My shareholders are watching. My investors are out there. I need you to be the perfect wife, and that starts with being a transparent partner. I stared at the contract. He thought I was just a lucky IT employee who happened to own valuable property. He had no idea I bought that penthouse outright with cash from my first patent payout. He didn't know that the little computer company he mocked was actually a global cybersecurity powerhouse, the same company holding encryption keys to the servers his corporation used to bury its shady financial transactions. He was trying to steal a $3 million penthouse to cover a $12 million debt collapse. And somehow, he still believed he was doing me a favor. The arrogance was almost unbelievable. He wanted to strip away the only visible asset he thought I had, while insulting the career that created it. He wanted to use my success to repair his failures and expected gratitude in return. I took the fountain pen. Preston's eyes lit up with triumphant relief. Beatrice exhaled in satisfaction. I'll handle this, I said, my voice sharp as a blade. I'll give you exactly what this family needs to pay off every debt it has. But I didn't sign the contract. I never even touched the paper. I simply held the pen for a moment, then let it fall onto the mahogany table with a sharp clack. Hey, where are you going? Preston shouted as I turned away. You said I had important investors to introduce you to, remember, I replied, glancing back with a smile that should have terrified him. You wanted me to prove my value in front of everyone, didn't you? You wanted transparency. Then I'm about to become the most transparent person in this entire room. Abigail. Sign your name right now, Preston yelled, desperation cracking through his voice. Don't keep them waiting, Preston, I said as I walked down the hallway. The main event is about to begin. I never looked back. I no longer cared about his threats or his mother's insults. I was moving with the force of a landslide. Every step away from him brought me closer to the truth. They had spent the entire night trying to teach me my place. They had spent months treating me like a pawn in their social climbing game. Now it was my turn to flip the board. I headed straight for the sound and lighting control booth. I was about to use the very skills Preston mocked to make sure no one in that ballroom would ever forget the name Abigail again. The real CEO was about to step onto the stage, and the era of the Preston Family Trust was about to end right here tonight. I stared down at the crisp white pages of the post-nuptial agreement. The bold letters of the $3.5 million valuation of my penthouse seemed to vibrate against the mahogany surface of the table. To anyone else, these were just numbers and legal clauses, but to me they were the final evidence of a parasitic bond. Preston stood over me, his shadow stretching across the document like a shroud. He was still holding that silver fountain pen out, as if it were a scepter, and I was a subject who had no choice but to kneel. His face was a mask of cold impatience, and his eyes darted toward the ballroom doors every few seconds. He was terrified that his investors would notice his absence, but he was more terrified of losing his grasp on my property. Sign it, Abigail, he urged, his voice dropping into a low, threatening vibration. We do not have all night. The main course is being served, and I need to be back out there. Do not make me ask you again. Think about the life I am providing for you. Think about the prestige of the Preston name. You are one signature away from securing your place in this family forever. I looked from the pen to his perfectly tailored tuxedo. I looked at the diamond cufflinks I had gifted him for his promotion last winter. Then I looked at the empty space where my parents had stood just moments ago, before being escorted out like common criminals. The image of my father's frayed hem and my mother's tearful eyes flashed in my mind with the intensity of a lightning strike. In that exact second, the last lingering fragment of the woman who loved Preston evaporated. The Abigail who spent 5 years trying to fit into his narrow world, and the Abigail who swallowed her pride to maintain his ego, was gone. The internal silence that followed was not one of defeat, but of absolute power. The CEO of a global cybersecurity firm was finally awake, and she was done playing house. I reached out and slowly took the pen from his hand. Preston let out a long, audible sigh of relief, and his shoulders dropped. A triumphant smirk began to creep onto his lips. He actually thought he had won. He actually believed that his mediocre manipulation had successfully cornered a woman who specialized in dismantling international money laundering schemes for a living. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my own face. It was a smile that would have terrified my competitors in a boardroom. I did not move toward the signature line. Instead, I pressed the nib of the expensive pen into the center of the first page and dragged it down with a jagged, violent motion. The sound of the paper tearing was the most satisfying thing I had heard all day. I shredded the document into 4 uneven pieces and dropped them onto the floor. They fluttered down like oversized confetti, landing right next to the $1,000 Beatrice had thrown at my parents. Preston froze. The smirk on his face died instantly, replaced by a look of stunned horror. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he could find his voice. "What are you doing?" he finally shrieked, his face turning a deep mottled purple. "Have you lost your mind? That was a legal document. That was our future. Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I do know exactly what I just did," I said, my voice as steady as a glacier. "I just stopped being your collateral, Preston. I am done being the silent partner in your fraudulent life. You keep talking about my IT hobby as if I am some clerk in a basement. You have spent our entire marriage refusing to look at my tax returns or ask about my contracts because you were too busy worshiping your own reflection in your fake portfolio. You wanted a transparent partner. Well, here is some transparency for you. Your investment fund is not just underperforming, it is hemorrhaging cash. You are currently 3 months behind on your commercial lease, and your primary backer withdrew his support yesterday afternoon. You are not a high-stakes investor. You are a drowning man looking for someone to pull under with you." Preston took a step back, his eyes widening with genuine fear. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "No one knows about the backer. That is confidential information." I stepped into his personal space, forcing him to back up until his shoulders hit the wall. "I am the woman who built the encryption protocols your company uses to hide those secret ledgers, Preston. I am the person the SEC calls when they need to find the digital fingerprints of men exactly like you. You thought you married a quiet little support worker, but you actually married the person who has been auditing your downfall for the last 48 hours. I did not come here to sign your contract. I came here to close your doors." Preston started to reach for my arm, his face contorting with a desperate rage. "You would not dare," he hissed. "You would destroy yourself too. We are married. My reputation is your reputation. If I go down, you go down with me. You need this penthouse to stay in the family trust just as much as I do." I laughed, and the sound echoed through the quiet hallway with a chilling lack of warmth. "I do not need anything from you, Preston, and we are not in this together. My assets were established through a separate legal entity long before I met you. This penthouse is not marital property. It is the headquarters of a woman you never bothered to meet. You and your mother spent the night mocking my parents for their modest clothes and their simple lives. You treated the 2 people who represent everything you lack like garbage. You think they look poor. But they are richer than you will ever be, because they do not have to lie to the world every morning just to look in the mirror. I pushed the pieces of the shredded contract toward him with the toe of my white satin heel. You told me earlier to go out there and give your family what they deserve. That was the only honest thing you have said all year. I am going to do exactly that. Abigail, wait! He pleaded, his arrogance completely replaced by a pathetic, sniveling desperation. Let us talk about this. We can fix the seating. I will bring your parents back in. I will make my mother apologize. Just do not do anything rash. My investors are right behind those doors. If they hear even a whisper of this, my life is over. I adjusted the lace sleeves of my wedding gown and lifted my chin high. The weight of the dress felt like armor now. Your life was over the second you allowed your mother to put a dog in my father's chair, Preston. Everything that happens next is just the delivery of the invoice. I turned my back on him and began to walk toward the ballroom. I could hear his frantic footsteps behind me, but I did not stop. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, giving me a clarity I had not felt in years. He thought he was the architect of this night. He thought he was the one in control of the microphone. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. You do not humiliate the people who built the foundation I stand on. You do not get to take away the respect owed to the people who raised me. As I reached the grand doors, I did not look for a coordinator to open them for me. I pushed them open myself. The wall of sound and light hit me, but I did not blink. I was no longer the bride. I was the reckoning. I walked straight past the head table where Beatrice was feeding her dog another piece of salmon. I did not look at her. I did not look at the mocking faces of the groomsmen. I headed straight for the stage. I was going to take that microphone, and I was going to make sure every person in this room saw the Preston family exactly as they were. Bankrupt, fraudulent, and utterly finished. The straw had broken the camel's back, and now the landslide was starting. The heavy brass doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom yielded to my push, shutting behind me with a solid thud that sealed everyone inside. I stepped into the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers, leaving the terrified and desperate version of my husband alone in the hallway. The air in the room was thick with the scent of roasted truffle, expensive perfume, and vintage champagne. 300 of Chicago's most elite socialites and ruthless investors were completely engrossed in their networking, heavily disguised as a wedding celebration. The live entertainment had transitioned into a set spun by a high-end DJ, providing a smooth ambient soundtrack for the billionaires to discuss their mergers and acquisitions. I moved through the sea of perfectly decorated tables with a singular, unwavering focus. The heavy silk of my custom gown swept across the polished marble floor, but I no longer felt its weight. I no longer felt the crushing anxiety of trying to fit into this false world. Guests began to notice my approach. They parted like the Red Sea, offering polite, superficial smiles and raising their flutes of champagne, expecting me to wave back or perform the role of the submissive, glowing bride. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, completely ignoring their attempts to engage. I was not there to be their entertainment. I marched directly past the grand head table. Beatrice paused midway through feeding another piece of premium smoked salmon to her pampered poodle. Her perfectly drawn eyebrows pinched together in a sharp, aristocratic frown. She expected me to approach her chair, bow my head, and apologize for taking so long in the hallway. She expected me to quietly take my empty seat beside her and play the grateful peasant who had finally learned her place. I did not even turn my head in her direction. I walked right past her, as if she were nothing more than a ghost. I could feel her furious glare burning into the back of my neck, but it meant absolutely nothing to me now. Behind me, I could hear Preston's frantic footsteps pushing through the doors and trying to catch up. He was power walking, attempting to look casual and relaxed for his investors, while desperately hissing my name under his breath. Abigail, he whispered sharply, his voice strained with panic. Get back to the table right now. What are you doing? I ignored him entirely. I reached the steps of the elevated stage at the far end of the room where the DJ booth and the main audio-visual controls were set up. The DJ, an energetic man hired specifically to keep this wealthy crowd entertained, looked at me with confusion as I marched up the stairs in my wedding dress. He offered a practiced welcoming smile and reached for a spare microphone, assuming I wanted to make a traditional emotional toast to my new husband and his generous family. I did not wait for him to offer it. I stepped behind his expensive equipment table and firmly pulled the main microphone straight out of his hand. "Turn the music off," I said. My voice was low, but it carried an absolute freezing authority that left zero room for debate or hesitation. The DJ blinked in surprise, glancing nervously down at Preston, who was now standing at the base of the stage. Preston was waving his hands in a frantic cut-it-out motion, his face pale and sweating under the stage lights. He was trying to signal the DJ to ignore me, to keep the music playing, to drown out whatever he thought I was about to say. "Turn it off right now," I repeated, holding the DJ's gaze without blinking. "I am the one who signed your paycheck. Cut the audio." He swallowed hard, intimidated by the absolute certainty in my eyes, and slid the master volume fader all the way down to 0. The smooth, ambient music died instantly. The sudden absence of sound was incredibly jarring. It rippled through the massive ballroom like a physical shockwave. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks clattered awkwardly against porcelain plates. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. 300 elite guests turned their heads toward the stage in unison. The quiet, sophisticated chatter died out completely, replaced by a thick, heavy, and suffocating silence. It was the kind of absolute quiet that precedes a catastrophic event. From my elevated vantage point, I had a perfect view of the entire room. I looked down at the head table. Beatrice had put her glass down on the table with a sharp click. Her face was a mask of supreme irritation and condescension. She crossed her arms over her chest, glaring up at me. She clearly thought I was about to deliver some embarrassing, overly emotional speech about how lucky I was to join her prestigious family. She whispered something to the uncle sitting next to her, undoubtedly complaining about my lack of social etiquette and how my working-class roots were finally showing. She thought I was going to ruin her perfect aesthetic with cheap sentimentality. At the foot of the stairs, Preston looked like a man standing on the gallows with the rope already secured around his neck. He tugged violently at his Tom Ford collar, suddenly finding it very difficult to breathe. He shot me a look of pure, desperate warning, trying to silently command me to step down and save his fragile reputation. Trent and Harrison, the arrogant groomsmen who had mocked my parents just minutes ago, were standing near the bar. They exchanged confused smirks, whispering to each other and waiting for me to make a fool of myself. I stood tall, gripping the cold metal of the microphone tightly in my hand. I looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, fake socialites, and arrogant frauds, who had spent the last 3 hours mocking the incredible people who gave me life. They were all waiting for the blushing bride to speak. They were waiting for a display of overwhelming gratitude and submissive devotion. I looked directly at Preston, making sure he saw the absolute destruction waiting in my eyes. Then I raised the microphone to my lips. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, crisp and amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. The feedback crackled for a split second, demanding absolute attention. "I hope you are all enjoying the vintage champagne and the imported truffle appetizers. I know my mother-in-law Beatrice has spent the better part of the last 6 months making sure every single person in this room knows exactly how much this magnificent celebration cost." I looked directly at Beatrice. She was frozen in her seat at the head table, her face draining of all color. $150,000, I announced, letting the number hang heavy in the quiet air. That is the figure she has been boasting about at every country club luncheon and charity gala. She has painted a beautiful, heartwarming portrait of a wealthy, benevolent family lifting a penniless, working-class girl out of obscurity. She has spent the entire evening accepting your praises, soaking up your admiration, and acting as the gracious host of the social event of the year. I took a slow, deliberate step forward on the stage. But there is a very dark, very ugly reality hiding behind that perfectly curated high society image. I continued, my voice hardening into a blade. Just 10 minutes ago, right outside these doors in the private bridal suite, my new husband and his mother cornered my parents. They cornered the two people who sacrificed their entire lives to raise me. Beatrice threw a stack of $1,000 in cash at my father. She told them they looked too poor to sit at the main table. She said their presence would ruin her aesthetic and embarrass her in front of her billionaire investors. She ordered them to leave this hotel through the service elevator right next to the garbage bins so they would not infect her pristine elite guest list. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. 300 guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whispers broke out instantly. People turned to look at Beatrice, whose perfectly manicured hands were now shaking violently against the white linen tablecloth. Preston was paralyzed at the bottom of the stage, his mouth hanging open in sheer terror. "My parents left in tears," I said, projecting my voice to ensure every syllable struck its target. "They walked out of the back door of their own daughter's wedding because they loved me enough to endure the ultimate humiliation. They believed they were protecting my place in this prestigious family. They believed they were stepping aside so I could enjoy the magnificent, expensive gift that the Preston family had so graciously bestowed upon me." I gripped the microphone tighter, a cold smile forming on my lips. "But here is the absolute truth about that $150,000 gift," I said. I raised my free hand and signaled the audio-visual booth. "Let us take a look at who is actually funding this illusion." My assistant, standing ready in the booth above, hit the switch. The massive digital screens surrounding the ballroom, the ones Preston had demanded we rent to showcase our engagement photos, instantly flashed to life. But they did not show romantic pictures of us walking on the beach. They displayed high-resolution, undeniable financial documents. The entire room lit up with bank statements, cleared checks, and processed invoices. "Take a good look at the screens," I commanded, directing the attention of every chief executive officer, hedge fund manager, and socialite in the room. "That is the final invoice from the Ritz-Carlton catering department. $40,000, paid in full. Look at the name on the account." I paused, letting the guests read the massive bold text projected above their heads. "Now look at the deposit for the floral arrangements." I continued pacing the stage with the authoritative rhythm of a keynote speaker exposing a corporate fraud. $20,000 for the white orchids on your tables. Look at the booking fee for the jazz band. Look at the receipt for the open bar where you have been ordering top-shelf liquor all night long. Look at the $25,000 payment for this exact ballroom. The whispers in the crowd turned into loud, audible murmurs of shock. The evidence was irrefutable. Every single document displayed on those massive screens shared the exact same billing information. "None of those invoices say, Beatrice," I declared, my voice echoing like thunder. "None of those bank transfers came from Preston's investment fund. Every single dime spent on this wedding was charged to a titanium corporate card registered to my limited liability company, my cybersecurity firm." I pointed directly at Preston, who was now clutching his head in his hands, completely destroyed. "My husband and his friends spent the entire night mocking my career," I told the crowd. "They laughed at me. They called me a lowly IT worker who fixes routers in a basement. They told me I should get down on my knees and thank my mother-in-law for pulling me out of poverty. But the absolute undeniable truth is that this family is entirely broke. They have been funding their elite lifestyle on my silent financial backing. Every time a vendor threatened to cancel, Beatrice claimed her assets were tied up, and Preston begged me to cover the cost to save their reputation." I looked down at the head table. Beatrice had buried her face in her hands, attempting to hide from the burning stares of her wealthy friends. "This wedding," I announced, sweeping my arm across the grand room, "from the vintage champagne you are currently drinking, to the imported truffle on your plates, to the velvet cushion that Beatrice's dog is sitting on right now, was paid for completely by the lowly IT girl." The ballroom erupted. The illusion of the untouchable elite family had just been violently shattered. The high society guests, the very people Preston had been trying so desperately to impress, stared at the head table with absolute disgust and raw judgment. The tables had turned completely. The woman they thought was a peasant was the only one in the room writing the checks, and the family pretending to be royalty were nothing but desperate, cruel leeches. The shock in the room shattered as Preston finally snapped. The humiliation was too much for his fragile ego to process. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive collar, and the facade of the composed elite financial manager disintegrated completely. He let out a guttural shout and lunged toward the stage stairs, taking them two at a time. His heavy leather shoes pounded against the wood as he charged directly at me, his arm outstretched to violently rip the microphone from my hands and silence me. I did not flinch. I had anticipated his total collapse the moment the truth was exposed. As he lunged forward, I simply took a calm, calculated step to the right. Preston, blinded by sheer panic and absolute rage, lost his footing on the polished stage floor. He stumbled heavily, his momentum carrying him forward until he crashed onto his knees right next to the DJ mixing board. His perfectly styled hair fell into his sweaty face, and his expensive tuxedo jacket bunched up awkwardly around his shoulders. He looked absolutely pathetic kneeling on the stage of his own wedding, while 300 of his wealthiest clients watched in stunned silence. You cannot silence the truth by throwing a physical tantrum. Preston? I said, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. I looked down at him, adjusting my grip on the microphone. He glared up at me, breathing heavily, his eyes burning with pure hatred and desperation. He tried to scramble to his feet, but the sheer weight of the public humiliation seemed to pin him to the floor. I turned my attention back to the crowd, ensuring every single investor in that room was hanging on to my every word. Just 20 minutes ago, this man trapped me in the private bridal suite, I announced, projecting my voice to reach the furthest corners of the grand ballroom. He shoved a post-nuptial agreement in my face and demanded I sign it immediately. He tried to force me to transfer the deed of my $3.5 million penthouse into his family trust. He told me it was the only way to prove I was not a gold digger. He told me I needed to earn my place in this prestigious family by handing over the only valuable asset he thought I possessed to save his bruised ego. A low murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd. I paced across the stage, my white lace train gliding smoothly behind me. The bride they thought was a naive, submissive peasant was now commanding the room with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. You all sit there in your designer gowns and tailored suits, believing you entrusted your millions to a Wall Street prodigy. I continued, my gaze sweeping over the tables of executives and hedge fund managers. You look at Preston, and you see a financial genius, a man with the golden touch who guarantees high-yield returns. You probably agreed with him when he told you I was just a simple, uneducated IT support worker who should be incredibly grateful to marry into his elite circle. You thought I spent my days fixing routers and resetting passwords. I stopped pacing and stood dead center on the stage. The silence in the room was so thick it felt suffocating. I looked directly at Trent and Harrison standing paralyzed near the bar. Their arrogant smirks had completely vanished, replaced by a sickening pale dread. Well, let me formally introduce myself to Chicago high society. I stated, my voice striking like a hammer. I am not a girl who fixes computers in a basement. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Cyber Forensics. And unfortunately for my new husband, the company your family so deeply despises is the exact same firm that was quietly contracted by the Securities and Exchange Commission 2 weeks ago. The entire ballroom held its breath. The sudden realization hit the crowd like a shockwave. Preston let out a choked, desperate gasp from the floor. He tried to speak, to deny it, to scream, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. We were not hired to fix a glitch, I declared, delivering the absolute killer blow. The SEC hired my firm to conduct a comprehensive digital audit of Preston's entire investment fund. They brought my team in to trace the encrypted offshore accounts and the hidden ledgers that your so-called financial genius thought he had permanently scrubbed from the servers. I have spent the last 48 hours tearing through his firewalls, tracing every single fraudulent wire transfer and mapping out his entire illegal network. I looked down at the broken man kneeling at my feet. The satisfaction of this moment was indescribable. He thought he was marrying a naive charity case he could manipulate and rob, I told the horrified investors. He wanted to steal my home to cover his massive debts. He had absolutely no idea he was sleeping next to the lead forensic investigator building the federal case against him. I picked up my phone and signaled the tech assistant on the mezzanine level. With a single snap of my fingers, the massive LED screens throughout the Ritz-Carlton ballroom moments ago displaying glamorous wedding photos suddenly flickered and turned a deep, blood-red color. Financial charts with collapsing downward lines and massive debt figures began flashing across the screens in front of 300 stunned guests. "Do you see those red numbers flashing on the screen?" I said into the microphone, my voice cold, powerful, and echoing through the ballroom. "That's not a system malfunction. That is the dying heartbeat of Preston Investments, the fund many of you trusted with millions of dollars you spent your entire lives earning." Preston was kneeling beneath the stage trying to stand, but his trembling legs gave out beneath him again. His voice cracked with terror. "Abigail, stop. You don't know what you're doing. Those are confidential records. You're destroying our lives." "Our lives?" I smirked and stepped closer to the edge of the stage, staring directly into his wide, panicked eyes. "Are you talking about the $12 million in debt caused by the Ponzi scheme you built? Or the fact that you've been using money from new investors to pay fake returns to older investors for the past 18 months? The ballroom erupted into chaos. The whispers became furious shouting as Preston's biggest investors leapt to their feet, faces burning red, while staring at the screens, listing frozen offshore accounts one after another. Then I turned toward Beatrice. She remained frozen at the head table, gripping the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her tiny designer dog sensed the tension and began barking hysterically. "And Mrs. Beatrice Preston," I continued mockingly, "the woman who never stops bragging about her elite family legacy. You said my parents looked poor and would ruin your magazine-perfect wedding photos. Would you also like everyone here to know why your luxury mansion in the suburbs has been under foreclosure notice for the past 3 months?" A bright red bank notice appeared on the screen displaying Beatrice Preston's name alongside an official eviction order scheduled for the end of the month. The crowd gasped again. The wealthy women seated beside her immediately pulled their chairs away as if poverty itself might be contagious. "Lies, all lies!" Beatrice screamed, her voice shattering. "You forged those documents! Security, get this insane woman out of here!" But no security guards moved. They stood frozen in place, equally stunned by what they were witnessing. I laughed softly. "You don't need security, Mrs. Beatrice," I said. "Those records came directly from the asset management servers you personally gave me access to when you asked me to fix your computers. You assumed I knew nothing about finance. In reality, you handed the keys to your collapsing empire to the exact person capable of exposing it." I looked down at Preston. He was covering his face, sobbing. The arrogance of the brilliant financial executive had vanished. All that remained was a desperate fraud finally cornered by the truth. Now, do you all understand why they were so desperate to force me into signing away my $3.5 million penthouse tonight? I asked the ballroom. Not because they wanted proof of love, not because they cared about protecting a family legacy. My penthouse was the last life raft keeping them from sleeping under a bridge next month. They wanted to use the assets of a little IT girl to pay for their stupidity and bottomless greed, I continued sharply. They mocked my parents for wearing inexpensive clothes, but at least my parents never had to steal from other people to buy Tom Ford suits and luxury evening gowns. Then I faced Preston again, my voice turning cold as steel. "Preston, you said I owed your family gratitude for bringing me into elite society. Look around you now. Your elite society is staring at you like human trash. You never lifted me up. You were trying to drag me down into the hole with you. But you forgot one thing." I paused. "I am not some fragile woman who needs your protection. I am the person holding every piece of evidence capable of sending both you and your mother to prison." The ballroom exploded, shouting, threats, lawsuits, panic. Beatrice collapsed into her chair, her face drained completely white beneath the judgmental stares of the same wealthy friends she had spent years trying to impress. "Your performance is over," I announced calmly as I placed the microphone down on the DJ table. "Tonight you wanted the most unforgettable wedding Chicago has ever seen, and I gave you exactly that." A wedding of truth and justice. I turned and walked away without looking back at the ruins I had just created. Everything had already been set in motion. Justice wasn't only flashing across the LED screens anymore, it was already approaching through the front entrance of the hotel. And a new chapter of my life was about to begin. A life without lies, without humiliation, and most importantly, a life where my parents would finally be treated with the dignity they deserved. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit the ballroom like a physical shockwave. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Then absolute pandemonium erupted. The polished facade of the Chicago elite shattered instantly. A man in a custom Italian tuxedo slammed his crystal champagne flute against the marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass acted as a starting pistol. 300 guests transformed from sophisticated socialites into a mob of panicked, furious victims. Men and women who had just been toasting to Preston's brilliant financial mind were now screaming at the top of their lungs. Heavy gold chairs were knocked over as wealthy investors scrambled to pull out their cell phones. Their fingers were trembling with rage and terror as they desperately dialed their legal teams. I watched from the stage as the opulent wedding reception devolved into a frantic crime scene. A prominent real estate developer I recognized from a charity gala was shouting into his phone, demanding his attorneys freeze every single asset connected to Preston's fund. Wives were crying, clutching their expensive jewelry as they realized their summer homes and retirement accounts had evaporated into thin air. The jazz band had fled the stage. The catering staff stood frozen by the kitchen doors, dropping silver trays of hors d'oeuvres in pure shock. The very people Preston had worshipped, the billionaires he had bent over backward to impress, were now hurling furious threats and demanding his blood. Preston was still on the floor of the stage, but the arrogant fight had completely drained out of his body. The terrifying reality of federal prison was staring him right in the face. He looked at the massive digital screens still flashing the damning evidence of his $12 million scheme. He looked at the raging crowd of investors who wanted to tear him apart limb by limb. Then he looked up at me. The transition was sickening to witness. The man who had sneered at my father's modest suit just minutes ago suddenly shed every ounce of his manufactured dignity. He did not stand up. Instead, he literally dragged himself across the polished wood of the stage, moving on his hands and knees like a beaten animal until he reached my feet. He grabbed the heavy silk fabric of my wedding dress, pulling at it with desperate, shaking hands. "Abigail, please," he sobbed. The sound was pathetic, a wet, ragged noise completely stripped of his usual smooth charm. His face was slick with cold sweat and tears ruining his perfectly styled hair. "You cannot do this. You cannot give this data to the federal agents. They will lock me away for decades. Please, I am your husband. We just took our vows before God. You promised to love me." I looked down at him feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just the cold, clinical satisfaction of neutralizing a toxic threat. I tried to pull my dress from his grasp, but he clung to it like a drowning man clutching a life raft. He was trembling so violently that the vibrations traveled up the fabric of my gown. "I will do anything," he begged, his voice cracking as he looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I will fix it. I will give your parents the entire head table. They can have the center seats. They can sit wherever they want. I will make my mother apologize to them right now on her knees. I will buy your father 10 new custom suits. I will scrub their feet if that is what you want. Just please turn off those screens. Delete the files. Tell the crowd it was a prank. Tell them your cybersecurity company made a terrible mistake. You have the power to erase it, Abigail. You can hack into the servers and make it all go away." A group of furious investors broke past the first line of tables and stormed toward the edge of the stage. They were shouting vicious threats, demanding to know exactly where their money was hidden. Preston cowered behind my legs, actually using my body as a human shield against the very people he had brought together to impress. The man who claimed to be my ultimate protector, the man who insisted I needed him to survive in high society, was hiding behind my wedding gown, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can change," he wailed, his face pressed desperately against the delicate lace of my dress. "I will sell the luxury cars. We will move into your penthouse. I will sign the postnuptial agreement giving you absolutely everything I own. I will leave the financial sector completely. Just do not hand me over to the authorities. I am begging you, Abigail. I will be the perfect submissive husband you want. I will respect your parents. I will cut my mother out of my life if you ask me to. Just please save me from this. His desperation was entirely repulsive. Even now, facing the absolute ruin of his entire existence, he thought he could buy his way out. He thought my parents' dignity was a cheap bargaining chip he could trade for his freedom. He genuinely believed that offering a chair at a table would erase the profound cruelty he had inflicted on my family. He thought I was just as corrupt and transactional as he was. He was bargaining with stolen chips, trying to buy back a soul he had sold a long time ago. Beatrice collapsed. The woman who had spent her entire life curating a mask of flawless aristocratic grace finally broke. She hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, her knees buckling under the weight of 300 judging eyes. Her designer handbag, the one she had used to hide the $1,000 she threw at my parents, skidded across the floor, spilling expensive lipsticks and fake gold compacts. She looked up, and for the first time her eyes were not filled with cold condescension. They were wide with a primal, animalistic terror. Mrs. Abernathy, the grand matriarch of Chicago's most prestigious charitable foundation, took a slow, deliberate step back. She pulled her silk shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if Beatrice were a contagious disease. Behind her, the other board members followed suit, their expressions shifting from shock to pure, unadulterated disgust. These were the people Beatrice had hosted for decades. These were the people she had lied to, boasted to, and looked down upon. Now they were watching her drown in her own deceit. "It is a lie!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail that echoed off the high ceilings. Abigail is insane. She is a disgruntled employee trying to ruin us. Look at her. She is a nobody. She is a support worker. But nobody was looking at me as a nobody anymore. They were looking at the screens. They were looking at the bank statements that proved Beatrice had not paid her mortgage in 90 days. They were looking at the foreclosure notice for the very mansion where she had hosted her last garden party. The social execution was swift and merciless. In the world Beatrice worshipped, once the money vanishes, the respect evaporates instantly. I saw Mrs. Montgomery, the woman Beatrice had been trying to impress all night, lean over and whisper to her husband. It was loud enough for the front row to hear. "How absolutely tacky," she said, her lip curling. "To think we actually sat at her table. She is nothing but a common thief in a counterfeit dress." Beatrice let out a strangled sob, clawing at the air as if she could grab the fragments of her reputation and pull them back together. She turned toward her friends, reaching out a hand to Mrs. Abernathy. "Lydia, please, you know me. You know our family legacy. We are the Prestons." Mrs. Abernathy did not even acknowledge the hand. She turned her back on Beatrice with a cold, mechanical precision. "I think it is time we leave," she told the group. "There is no legacy here, only debt and desperation." The sight of her peers walking away was the final psychological blow. Beatrice did not just cry, she wailed. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the golden cage she had built was actually made of straw, and it was currently on fire. She huddled on the floor, a broken relic of a world that had already moved on. I turned my gaze down to the stage floor, where Preston was still clinging to the hem of my dress. He was watching his mother's social death with a glazed look of horror. His grip on my lace train tightened, his knuckles white and shaking. He was still trying to bargain, still trying to find a way to manipulate the situation. "Abigail, listen to me," he whispered, his breath hitching. "My mother is old. She is confused. We can fix her accounts. We can use your company's resources to move the money back before anyone notices. You are a genius with code. You can make the digital trail disappear. I will do anything you want. I will be whatever you need me to be. Just save me." He looked up at me, his face a mask of pathetic desperation. He actually believed that I would become his accomplice. He thought that by offering me his total submission, he could tempt me into the same dark pit of fraud that he called a life. He still did not understand who he was talking to. He still saw me as a tool to be used rather than a person with a moral compass. I looked at him with a coldness that seemed to freeze the very air between us. I thought about my father, Richard. I thought about the way he had spent 30 years teaching children that numbers do not lie. I thought about my mother, Patricia, and how she had sewn my wedding dress with fingers that were stiff from volunteer work. They had raised me to value the truth above all else. They had taught me that a person's worth is measured by their integrity, not their bank balance. And then I looked at the man kneeling at my feet. A man who had just agreed that my parents looked poor. A man who was willing to let a dog take my father's chair just to satisfy a fake socialite's ego. You really do not get it, do you, Preston? I said, my voice low and lethal. You think this is about the money. You think I am doing this because I want your assets, or because I want to be the one in control? He blinked his eyes, darting frantically. Is it not? He stammered. No, I replied. This is about the seat you took away. This is about the $1,000 your mother threw onto the table. This is about the service elevator you tried to force my parents into. You treated the two most honorable people I know like they were trash. You thought their lack of wealth made them invisible. You thought their humility made them weak. I reached down and gripped his wrists. My strength surprised him. He tried to pull back, but I held him firmly, forcing him to look up at me. You spent the last year telling me that I was lucky to be part of your family, I continued. You told me that I needed your name to have value. But look at you now, Preston. You are a criminal kneeling in a suit I bought, crying on a stage I paid for. You have no name, you have no legacy, and you definitely have no wife. Preston started to babble again, his words a jumbled mess of apologies and empty promises. I will bring them back. I will apologize to Richard. I will give him a seat at the center of the room. Please, Abigail. It is too late for seats at the table, Preston, I said. With a sudden sharp movement, I yanked the heavy silk of my wedding dress out of his hands. The force of the gesture made him fall backward flat onto the stage floor. He lay there looking up at me, his mouth working, but no sound coming out. He was completely stripped of his armor. The charismatic investment genius was gone. Only the frightened little boy who had built his life on a foundation of stolen money remained. I looked toward the back of the room. My parents were no longer there. They had already been escorted to a private lounge by my head of security away from the madness. They did not have to see this. They did not have to witness the filth. I looked back at Preston. I stepped toward the edge of the stage, looking down at him from a height he would never reach again. You asked me to give your parents what they deserve, I told him, my voice carrying to every person in the room. And you promised me that I would eventually sit at the head table with your investors. I paused, a thin, sharp smile touching my lips. But there is a fundamental difference between us, Preston. My parents may wear rented suits and handmade dresses, but they are the only ones in this room who can sleep tonight with a clear conscience. They are the only ones who do not have to hide from the light. Preston tried to reach for my shoe one last time, a final groveling attempt to stay connected to my power. I pulled my heel back with a sharp, decisive snap. My parents never wanted your seats, Preston, I said, and they certainly never wanted your approval. Because where I come from, we have a very simple rule. I leaned down, my face just inches from his. My parents never sit at the same table as criminals, I whispered. And as of tonight, that includes you. I stood up and signaled the security team. The ballroom doors opened and the room went cold as the final domino prepared to fall. The psychological execution was complete. Now it was time for the legal one. I stood at the edge of the stage, my silhouette stark against the crimson data of his debt still glowing on the massive screens behind me. I did not need to shout to be heard anymore. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the discarded whiskey glasses at the back of the hall. I looked toward the grand entrance and caught the eye of the man waiting there. I gave a single sharp nod of my head. It was a signal I had prepared at dawn, long before I ever put on this white veil of lies. The doors to the ballroom burst open with a force that made the crystal chandeliers jingle like a warning. 6 individuals in dark suits and tactical windbreakers strode into the hall. They did not move like wedding guests. They moved with the terrifying rhythmic efficiency of a machine designed to dismantle lives. The yellow letters spelling out FBI across their backs seemed to burn under the gold lighting. Leading them was a man with a face like granite, holding a folder that contained the official end of the Preston legacy. Preston, who was still sprawled on the floor at my feet, tried to scramble backward. He looked like a beetle flipped on its back legs, flailing as he tried to find purchase on the polished stage. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting toward the service exit, then back to the federal agents. He let out a whimper that sounded more like a wounded animal than a high-stakes investment manager. All the arrogance he had used to insult my father just minutes ago had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, terrified shell. Agent Miller, the lead investigator, I had spent 12 hours with 2 days ago, did not stop until he reached the foot of the stage. He did not look at the floral decor. He did not look at the towering cake. He looked only at the man cowering behind my silk train. He pulled a badge from his pocket and held it high enough for the cameras of the whispering socialites to catch every detail. Preston Anderson, he stated, his voice a booming baritone that cut through the remaining gasps of the crowd. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with 16 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of money laundering, and the orchestration of an unlicensed Ponzi scheme totaling over $12 million in misappropriated investor funds. You have the right to remain silent. The ballroom, which I thought could not get any louder, erupted into a cacophony of jeers and screams. Investors who had been waiting for this moment surged forward, held back only by Ritz-Carlton security and the 2 FBI agents flanking Miller. These were men who had lost their children's college funds and their own retirement dreams to Preston's lies. The elite mask of Chicago society was gone, replaced by a mob hungry for blood and justice. Beatrice suddenly screamed a high-pitched, glass-shattering sound that made her poodle jump from its velvet cushion and flee toward the kitchens. She scrambled from her seat, her heavy silk dress tripping her as she rushed toward Agent Miller. She looked unhinged, her face twisted in a mask of ugly desperation. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with a desperation that was almost physical. "This is a private family event. Do you know who we are? I am friends with the governor. I will have your badge for this. This is all a mistake, a cruel joke played by that common little girl on the stage." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, but Agent Miller did not even blink. He looked at her with the same bored expression one might use on a piece of trash blocking the sidewalk. "Mrs. Preston, we have a warrant for your arrest as well," he said coolly. "You are being charged as an accessory after the fact, and for the fraudulent concealment of assets. You can come quietly, or we can do this in front of your friends." Beatrice froze. The realization that her status, her name, and her fake jewels could not protect her hit her like a physical weight. She looked around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face among the women she had spent decades trying to impress. She found only cold, hard glares. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been her closest social ally, turned her back and began talking to her lawyer. The social execution was now being followed by a legal one. Preston's hands were shaking so violently he could not even wipe the sweat from his eyes. Agent Miller stepped up onto the stage. He did not ask for permission. He reached down, grabbed Preston's arm, and hauled him to his feet. The sound of the metal handcuffs clicking shut over Preston's wrists was amplified by the microphone I still held in my hand. It was a sharp, metallic snap that signaled the final curtain call for his career and his freedom. Preston looked at me one last time, his face a jumbled mess of snot tears and unadulterated terror. "Abigail, please," he whispered. His voice caught in a pathetic sob. "Tell them I was confused. Tell them you handled the accounts." I leaned in close to his ear, ensuring the microphone was off, but the world could see my smile. "I am the one who gave them the keys to your vault," Preston, I whispered. "I did not just audit you. I buried you." Miller led him down the stairs. Preston stumbled, his head bowed, the $5,000 tuxedo I bought him now a costume of shame. As they reached the center of the room, the crowd parted not out of respect, but out of a desire not to be touched by the filth of his failure. Beatrice was being led out by a female agent, her legs giving way every few steps. She was not the Queen of Chicago anymore. She was just another criminal in a designer dress. As they reached the lobby doors, Beatrice broke free for a second. She turned and began to run after the agents who were shoving Preston toward a waiting black SUV. Her scream echoed through the marble foyer, a raw, primal wail of a woman who had lost her son and her vanity in the same hour. She tripped over her own hem, falling face first onto the hotel carpet. Her fake hair bun went lopsided, and her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks. She looked like a broken porcelain doll discarded in the trash. I stood on that stage and watched until the heavy doors swung shut, cutting off her cries. I felt a cool, refreshing breeze flow through my spirit. The house of cards was gone. The leeches were being taken to the only cage that could hold them. I looked down at the floor of the stage where the pieces of the post-nuptial agreement were still scattered. I kicked them aside with the toe of my shoe. I turned toward the DJ booth. I did not ask him to play music. Instead, I looked at the 300 people who were still standing in shocked silence. "The bar is still open for another 30 minutes, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and devoid of any malice. "But I suggest you all go home and check your bank accounts. As for me, I have a family to find." I set the microphone down on the DJ table and began to unpin the long, heavy veil from my hair. I let it drop to the stage floor, a white shroud for a marriage that died before it ever truly lived. I stepped down the stairs, not as a Preston, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally reclaimed her name and her power. My parents were waiting in the quiet of the lounge, and for the first time in 5 years I was going to sit at their table. I stepped off the elevated stage, my white lace train gliding across the floor like a silent wave. Every single eye in the grand ballroom was fixed on me, but the weight of their judgment no longer felt like a burden. It felt like fuel. I walked past the empty head table where the remains of the vintage champagne and the discarded porcelain plates sat as monuments to a family that no longer existed. I did not look back at the doors where the federal agents had led Preston and Beatrice away. Their names were already fading from my mind, replaced by the steady rhythmic beat of my own heart. I moved toward the quiet lounge area tucked away from the main hall, where the noise of the whispering socialites could not reach. I found my parents sitting on a high-backed velvet sofa. My father Richard was staring at his hands, his shoulders still tense from the humiliation he had endured. My mother, Patricia, was clutching her small, beaded purse, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and lingering sadness. They looked so small in that vast, opulent room, but to me, they were the only giants left standing. I reached them, and without saying a word, I knelt on the floor in my $1,000 wedding gown and wrapped my arms around both of them. I felt my father's breath hitch, and my mother's hands finally loosen their grip on her purse to stroke my hair. "I am so sorry," I whispered into my mother's neck. "I should have never let them bring you here. I should have never let them make you feel like you were less than." "Abigail," my father said, his voice rough and uncertain as he looked at my face. "What just happened? Where is Preston? Where are all those people going?" "Preston is exactly where he belongs, Dad," I said, pulling back to look him in the eye. "He and his mother are never going to hurt this family again. They thought they could use us as props for their fake life, but they forgot that I am the one who writes the code. I am the one who sees through the firewalls." I stood up and reached for their hands, pulling them gently to their feet. My mother smoothed the skirt of her handmade dress, looking at the expensive crystal chandeliers one last time. "I do not think we belong here, Abigail," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should just find a bus and head home. I do not want to cause any more trouble for your business." I smiled a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes for the first time all day. "You are never a trouble, Mom, and you are never riding a bus again if you do not want to. We are leaving this place right now, but we are not going back to the suburbs just yet." I led them toward this grand lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. As we walked, the hotel staff, who had previously looked through my parents as if they were invisible, now snapped to attention. The concierge bowed slightly as I passed, and the security guards held the heavy glass doors open with a new level of reverence. They had seen the screens. They knew that the woman in the white dress was the power in the room. We reached the sidewalk where the cool Chicago air hit our faces like a long-awaited apology. My father looked around for a taxi, but I stepped toward the curb where a sleek, midnight black Maybach was idling. My assistant had arranged it the moment the audit results were confirmed. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, stepped out and opened the rear door for us. "Wait, Abigail," my mother said, hesitating at the door of the luxury car. "We cannot afford this. This is for Preston's friends." "No, Mom," I said, guiding her into the plush leather interior. "This is for us. Preston does not have any friends left, and he definitely does not have any money. This car belongs to my firm. And so does the trip we are about to take." I slid into the seat next to them, the scent of new leather and expensive cedarwood filling the cabin. I looked at the digital itinerary on my phone and then looked at my parents. Preston had planned a 2-week honeymoon in a private villa in the Maldives, I told them. He spent months bragging about how exclusive it was and how I should be grateful he was taking me there. He did not mention that he was planning to pay for it with the money he hoped to steal from my penthouse sale. But I canceled his reservation an hour ago. My father frowned. "Canceled it." "But Abigail, that was your honeymoon." "It was a cage, Dad," I replied. "Instead, I have rebooked the entire trip. We are going to the same resort, but I have upgraded us to the presidential overwater estate. It has 3 bedrooms, a private chef, and a view of the ocean that goes on forever. We are leaving on a private charter from O'Hare in 2 hours. Just the 3 of us. A real family vacation." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from shame. "Abigail, you worked so hard for that degree and that business," she whispered. "You should be enjoying your success with a husband who loves you. I am enjoying my success by protecting the people who actually love me," I said firmly. "I do not need a husband who views my parents as a social liability. I have everything I need right here in this car." As the Maybach began to pull away from the curb, I saw the glitter of something on my left hand. The 5-carat diamond engagement ring that Preston had presented to me with so much theatrical flair. I looked at the stone, a cold, hard rock that symbolized every lie, every insult, and every moment I had tried to make myself small for him. I reached down and twisted the band off my finger. "Wait the car," I commanded the driver. He slowed to a stop, right in front of the large decorative trash bin at the edge of the hotel plaza. I rolled down the window and looked at the Ritz-Carlton ballroom one last time. I could see the blue and red lights of the police cars still flashing against the marble pillars. I held the ring between my thumb and forefinger, letting it catch the streetlights for a fraction of a second. Then I let go. The diamond hit the bottom of the metal bin with a hollow, tinny clatter. I rolled up the window and signaled the driver to proceed. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest, as if the air in Chicago had suddenly become easier to breathe. I was no longer Abigail Preston. I was Abigail, the woman who built an empire from a basement cubicle. I was the daughter of Richard and Patricia, and I was finally free. I leaned back against the headrest and took my mother's hand in mine. My father put his arm around my shoulders, and for the first time in 5 years, we sat together without the shadow of an arrogant man looming over us. We watched the city skyline blur past the windows, a forest of glass and steel that I had conquered on my own terms. There are people in this world who believe that a brand-name suit can hide a hollow soul. There are people who think that a seat at a VIP table is more valuable than a lifetime of integrity. They define the worth of a human being by the price of their shoes and the prestigious label on their business card. But those people are living in a house of cards, made of stolen debt and fragile vanity. They do not understand that true power does not come from looking down on others. It comes from the strength of the people who stood by you when you had nothing. My husband's family thought they were teaching me a lesson about high society. They thought they were showing me where I belonged. But they made the most expensive mistake of their lives when they decided to humiliate the people who gave me my steel spine. When you take away the respect owed to the people who raised me, you do not just insult my past. You declare war on my future. and they were never equipped to survive the storm I was bringing. As we reached the highway heading toward the airport, I looked at the ringless hand resting on my mother's lap. It looked strong, it looked capable, and most importantly, it looked like it belonged exactly where it was. At a table built on truth where everyone has a seat and no one is ever left standing in the cold. The invoice had been delivered, and for the first time the balance was zero. We were going to the Maldives, and when we came back, I would have a new name and a life that no one else would ever be allowed to script again. The audit of Abigail was complete, and the results were perfect. The story of Abigail's wedding delivers a profound and grounding lesson. True worth is defined by character and integrity, not by bank balances, designer labels, or superficial social status. In a world that frequently equates success with wealth and prestige, it is dangerously easy to believe that the elite possess a superior kind of value. Preston and his mother Beatrice built their entire existence on this toxic illusion. They used their fabricated wealth as a weapon to intimidate and humiliate anyone who did not fit their narrow, materialistic worldview. However, as the narrative vividly illustrates, a life built on deceit and arrogance is incredibly fragile. Abigail's parents, wearing their rented suits and handmade dresses, possessed a quiet, unbreakable dignity that no amount of stolen money could ever purchase. They were willing to sacrifice their own comfort and swallow their pride out of pure, unconditional love for their daughter. That is the absolute essence of genuine wealth. The most empowering takeaway from this story is the importance of self-respect and unwavering boundaries. Abigail initially tried to shrink herself to fit into a toxic environment, silencing her own voice to keep the peace. But the moment her parents were degraded, she remembered her roots and reclaimed her power. She teaches us that we must never compromise our core values or abandon the people who supported us when we had nothing, just to seek validation from those who only care about appearances. Real power lies in living authentically and fiercely protecting the boundaries that safeguard our peace and our loved ones. Ultimately, this story urges us to evaluate the people in our lives based on how they treat those who seemingly can do nothing for them. Stand firm in your authenticity and never allow the superficial judgments of others to dictate your worth or sever your bond with those who truly love you.